it can be very transactional when we're in rooms together. And so we hope that you would, this is an invitation to really bring your full self into this space, whether you wear a federal hat, a community hat, a local government, or state hat. We all are living in place and community, and it's an opportunity to really ground that conversation and our lived experience as part of it. I also just want to acknowledge that Communities First recognizes that Indigenous people have different relationships, recognition and exclusion from the United States, including the fact that many tribal nations have nation-to-nation relationships with the U.S. That said, the voice and knowledge of Indigenous communities are essential to the generational infrastructure shifts that will happen in the U.S. context as a result of the recent passages of U.S. federal legislative tools and budgets designed to make investments in Black, Indigenous, and people of color and environmental justice communities, of which many Indigenous govern lands. Members of the Indigenous communities can be supported by and benefited from these investments through their own government and/or organizations, or through the direct pay initiatives designed directly for communities. We are in the process of finding an Indigenous convener for an Indigenous-specific space. But until that comes together, we invite all those who are part of the conversation. With that, I want to turn the conversation over to the second plenary, the open plenary, to really help to ground us in this moment. A lot of this discussion that we've had is very hard to really understand, but it is our hope that a portion of this helps to seed what is actually happening to meet this moment. As part of the discussion, I am introducing Helen Chin, who is the president of Communities First, to come on up. Sacha Rose-Phillips from the McKnight Foundation. We will have also Sharice Tyree from the U.S. Department of Transportation, and Gloria Lowe, We Want Green Too. And I want to acknowledge that we are hoping to have both an intergenerational conversation throughout the day. We're grateful for the eldership for those who've been doing this work for decades, and a portion of this conversation is really to help to bridge a lot of what has been happening to date. Thank you.
You pick your space. Mama Lowe, I'm gonna stay with her the whole time, so we are in community, so I'm gonna let her pick her space.
Oh.
Oh, look at you. You gave me a seat and everything so I can sit with you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Stephanie, for helping us ground the space as well as that meditation. It was amazing. I felt very calm coming into this. My name is Helen Chin. I'm the president of the Communities First Fund. But before we get started, I actually want to take a moment to thank everyone because, as Stephanie mentioned, we sort of rallied to get this be in community together. So I want to acknowledge the time and the energy that people have taken to come into this space. As Stephanie mentioned, this is our moment. For many years, we've been working together to try to get to this place. And what is clear to me by the energy in this room and the numbers in this room is that we are ready for this moment. This moment has been in the making for decades. For me, it started 15 years ago. Prior to launching the Communities First Fund, I was actually working on EJ issues within New York, but I also was the director of the Sustainable Environments Program at the Cerna Foundation. So I was doing a lot of place-based giving across the country. And during the Obama administration, there was a level of excitement and energy because at that time, I was really thinking about, like, how do we create just and sustainable communities? The president had come out and has stated a commitment. And the thing that happened during that time, I always felt like we kind of like noodled around on the sustainability piece. We never got the justice part right. We didn't know what it meant to center community. We didn't know how to lean in to make sure that we were acknowledging the past harm that had been to community, nor was there an acknowledgement that there were actually systems within the federal government that was allowing to perpetuate this. So when the Biden administration came in, I was like, wait, do we have a second bite of the apple? Because what I was hearing from day one was there was a commitment around racial equity, and there was going to be a centering around community. And for the first time, there was also an acknowledgement that we had never been able to do enough because the money had never been there. The excuse was always, oh, with good intentions, we mean well, but it never translated because we never had the money. So whether it was communities like Detroit, Rondo, Pembroke, Leechland Indigenous Community, or Fort Wayne, we got a lot of plans. People came into our community, and there was never any money. That's what's different in this moment. We have almost $4 trillion. So for this region alone, we are talking about if we just get a percentage of that, for the first time, we have the ability to align those resources to the community plan and the community visioning. What is also interesting is for the first time, we are moving past a policy conversation into a real conversation around implementation. What does it actually mean to implement on the ideas and the visioning that allows us to repair communities and center communities in such a way that they are actually holding the transformational change to allow for thriving communities? So with that, I want to be able to pull our panelists into the conversation because their collective wisdom for many decades has been centering and has been the ecosystem to be able to drive this work to meet this moment. So first, we are going to speak to, we're going to allow Mama Lowe to be able to talk about her experience here in Detroit. And then we are going to go to Sacha, and then to Amy. We move things around a little bit, so now I got to look at people. And then Amy, and then Cherie. We're going to allow each of them to introduce themselves, but also talk about their life's work, and in addition to that, how they are meeting their moment, this moment, whether it is from as a grassroots leader, whether a philanthropist, or whether working for the public sector. So with that, I'd love to let Mama Love speak first.
Wow, that's wonderful. I've never heard it put that way before. Thank you. I'm Gloria Lowe. I am the founder and current executive director of We Want Green Too. The initiative we started it'll be 17 years in February of next year. Our sole purpose has been to support the transformation of veterans and formerly incarcerated individuals back into civilian life by way of the energy sector. When speaking with Stephanie, I guess I have to say this one, speaking with Stephanie on, I believe it was on Friday, we hit a theme that has resonated with me all weekend, and that is that now is our time. For many years, I've waited for an opportunity that the work that we do in Detroit and other cities with large numbers of indigenous Black folk would get to a point that our humanities would be acknowledged, and acknowledge that we too are human, and now is our time. Today, we will have discussions with folks from government and other folks that are in the communities that I'm in, and we'll talk about what we need, our resources, perhaps even the pain that we've been through in the struggle. But once again, I return, my mind, my ancestors return to now is our time. And what exactly does that mean, that now is our time? My mentor, no longer with us on this side, Grace Boggs would say about the time on the clock of the world. It's that time. And we sit and we are talking about funding, but it's not just the funding. The money helps, Lord knows we know it helps. We Want Green Too did not experience any financial growth until 2020. Can you imagine? But we've done great things in Detroit, and we know we have. But what's that? Those things, what have they been based on? They've been based on the ideals that we hold, that when something happens in our lives, we have to ask ourselves why. And if you examine those things long enough, you'll find that it's something that you need to learn. 17 years ago, I recognized that I needed to learn about community, deep in community. Coming off of an injury myself that is part of the reason I'm here in this state today. I realized I never gave up, though. I am a head injury survivor with PTSD. So are so many of my fellow veterans. So we have something in common. What I realized in the midst of doing this work all these years, that every day I learned something new. I learned that my grandmother, Miss Edna Marie Robinson Valentine, was the first indigenous woman in America to be president of the chapter of Blue Star Mothers of America, which is the support organization for veterans. Here I am, walking in her shadow today. Now is our time. You know, I've watched the city, my home, Detroit, go through so many changes. But up until this moment, did I feel that something really drastic was getting ready to change that would help us to uplift and rise up out of this struggle that we've been about for so many years. A level of struggle that I could not have imagined 50 years ago. I've been an activist since my early days in high school, the Northern High School walkout, for any of those here who know anything about what we were doing in Detroit way back in the 60s, because we didn't feel that we had an equal share in our education. Sadly to say, it hasn't changed much, perhaps gotten worse today because of the powers that be that oftentimes has great difficulty in understanding that we too are human and therefore entitled to certain things in life, certain qualities, education. The young people in Detroit, in fact, last year won a phenomenal lawsuit against the state of Michigan for the same things that we fought for in the 60s, that we're entitled to a good education. We're entitled to a future of hope and not of despair. Once again, now is our time. So I think in having this opportunity to sit, to have these discussions today, I want everyone to understand that now is our time means that we need to examine some things right now today. We need to examine our hearts. If you think that you're more entitled to a certain quality of life than others are. If we look around with an open heart and we see the condition that this country is in today, we see the condition of the world. The world is there because there are some who think that they're more entitled than others to a certain quality of life. Now is our time. We have to get past that. Because what happens to me happens to you, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. That's the spirit that we live in on this planet and on this earth. So as we sit, I'm hoping that we can have honest, deep discussions about what it is what's necessary so that all communities can rise. It's something other than just simply having a discussion about equity. It's having a discussion about who we are as human beings. And are we more human in these times than ever before? Maybe that's a question we need to ask ourselves, because now is our time to either make the difference or we all fail together. So I'm happy to be here. I'm going to be happy to have discussions with those, especially those who want to come from the heart, because that's where I'm going to come from. I want to be able to tell you what the struggle has been for We Want Green too, and what the joyous moments have been, what the learnings have been, because they have superseded the work that we do. You know, oftentimes we take so much for granted in the things that we shouldn't. And I'm gonna ask you all to give out a certain prayer to all our veterans. Such a marginalized community, not only in Detroit and in the state of Michigan, but throughout this country. And you have to ask yourself, how dare you? These men and women put their lives on the line, and that's all anybody can give, to come back to a country that offers them nothing. They're on food stamps. They're struggling to raise families. They're homeless, no place to live. We have to ask ourselves, how dare we? And who are we as the greatest country on this planet? Now is our time to re-examine a lot of things so that we can be blessed enough to take the funding, this money that we're about to get, and do the right thing, because that's what makes the difference at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your words around how, for so many years, so many generations, we've silenced so many communities and not given them voice or agency. And like you say, now is our time. The collective learnings that we have and also how we've organized over these decades position us well to be able to hold the federal government accountable in a way that we're seeing them actually change a bit how they operate. Our panelists will be speaking to that. But again, thank you for your words around, like, this is our time. And those who historically have been invisible, this is our time to shine and to push and to hold the feds accountable, the federal government, accountable to us in this moment. With this, I would love to transition it to Sacha, who represents philanthropy, and philanthropy has been working in this space for the last couple of, I'm gonna just talk to Sacha. Sacha has been working diligently in this moment to leverage her positional power in order to be an ally and accomplice to communities. I wanna be able to give her space now to talk about the work that she is doing with McKnight to meet this moment.
Thank you, Helen, and good day, everyone. I want to start out this conversation by, maybe I should introduce myself a little bit first before I dive in. So, Sacha Rose-Phillips, I'm a program officer at McKnight Foundation. I've been in the philanthropic space for less than a year, and boy, this is an introduction. We're moving quite quickly, but I'm very happy to be here. So when we're talking about philanthropy, we have to be honest. We have to be honest about the ways in which we have disinvested in communities. And disinvestment, in many respects, points to a retraction. In some instances, we didn't invest in communities, right? And so now we have this influx of resources. Now is the time. We've heard that today. We've heard it in the last year and a half. As we've had all these federal resources come on board, but our communities don't have the absorptive capacity to really take full advantage of these resources. And so at McKnight, that is the fundamental challenge we're trying to solve. We're a bit late, but we're here. We're ready to move. And we want to make sure that when the next IRA and the next IIJA comes, I'm an optimist in that regard. We're going to need another surge of investments after this decade passes. So we want to make sure that we're no longer in this scramble and that we have built out robust civic infrastructure to get money to the ground. I watch a lot of HGTV, follow me here, and I see a lot of like old home renovations where they're like taking out the plumbing. It's not only about just getting communities the resources that they need, it's about fundamentally shifting how the government resources its people. This is the opportunity that we have. So we're taking plumbing out of a house, a massive house that is almost 250 years old. That's what's really happening. And I think it's really important for us as funders, but also our partners, to really reckon with that and take full advantage of the moment. Maybe I should pivot to what we're doing at McKnight. So how many of you are familiar with McKnight Foundation? You're in the middle? Yeah. We can talk about the history of McKnight and what we've gotten right and what we haven't gotten so right. But I also want to make visible some of the changes that have happened in the last few years. Our team is almost entirely new. 2/3 of us have come on in less than 2 years. And we have a particular theory of change around racial equity and diversifying organizations. And we have shared that perspective with the world, but recognized that we weren't actually doing that ourselves. And so that's why our leadership made a concerted effort to make sure that we were pulling from communities that were being impacted, and also made sure that we were bringing in the expertise that was needed to meet this moment. Something else that we've done that I think is really important is that with our endowment, we have a net zero commitment. So every dollar that we're investing needs to be aligned with our strategies and our perspectives around equity and climate. At this point, we have a 2050 goal. At this point, we're at 40%. We are moving at full speed. We're going to get there way before 2050. And then the third thing I want to say about what we're doing at McKnight, and this is very much at a macro level. Tomorrow when we have the panel on philanthropy, I can talk a little bit more about the specifics around how we're changing our grant-making strategy and the other kinds of capital we have at our disposal that we're making visible and sharing with our partners. The third thing is that we went to our board and we said, what use is a planet that's on fire? Or let me rephrase that. What use is having billions of dollars if we have a planet that is on fire? What are we gonna do? And so they said, okay, let's pull some resources out of our corpus. So we are increasing our budget by 50% to meet this moment. And we are not doing that just for kicks. We're doing it to challenge our other funders in the room. I see you. I see. We're doing it to challenge you, to also to match us, to exceed us in many respects, and let's align our strategies. Maybe I will continue on the note of what is it that we need to do as philanthropy, what we want our partners to join us in doing. So much of this money is formula dollars. I'm talking about this because I support our transportation portfolio, and if you're paid attention to the money and how it flows, so much of it is formula dollars. So who is at the table with state representatives talking about the new programs that you're creating, which communities to prioritize? Who's having those conversations? Are we supporting organizing? Are we supporting advocacy? And are we prioritizing that? I don't think we've done a good job of that, and that's one thing we're pushing for at McKnight. Support grassroots organizing. Another thing is, I talked a little bit about the different kinds of capital that we have at our disposal. I think we need to be more transparent about what it is to be in philanthropy and the power that we have, and to leverage that power for community. So T, you're in here, you've heard me say this already. T is one of our partners. Grant making, yes, but we can convene. If you don't have the space and time, we can convene. If there are partners you want to get to in Arizona, I guess we're focused on the 7 upper Midwest states, but in Arizona and DC and in Florida, call us up. We are ready and available and willing to help convene. There's also, we can talk about what kind of political capital, but we also do have political capital. We have to be honest about that, right? And what does that mean? Like, what access do you then have as our partners? We want to make that visible. And then I think as someone who's new to philanthropy, this is one thing I'm struggling with and working through. I think we need to be really public about our perspective and our point of view and not be neutral. As I said, 2/3 of us at McKnight are new. So we're coming with deep expertise, and we have opinions on things like hydrogen and CCS. And in many respects, it's aligned with community perspectives on things like hydrogen and CCS. And so I want to also challenge the other funders in this space who come with similar kinds of expertise in funder spaces and in spaces where folks are making decisions about money and how it flows and how we invest, to not be silent, and not to be passive. I'm really excited. It's daunting, but I'm so excited about what we can make possible. And I look forward to speaking with each and every one of you over the next 24 hours and maybe a little bit, to also talk about the work that you are all doing and how we can be supportive. Who do we need to call, essentially? I'm excited for the possibilities.
Thank you for that, Sacha. We thought it was important to be able to have philanthropy sitting in this space because historically they are a lot of the seed capital for much of the visioning that community does. And the reality is that they're also the capital. Like when the federal government historically has been absent, you see philanthropy stepping into that role, sometimes very clumsily, but the reality is that they are there. What you're hearing from Sacha from McKnight is that just like the federal government has been doing, we have to reimagine what our role is within philanthropy to be more of an ally as communities work to center themselves in this work. And as we talk about being able to repair the past harm and acknowledge what it is, philanthropy is really at a precipice to be able to be on the right side of this and be in right relationship with community in a different way. So we wanted to be able to show you what is possible, as well as how philanthropy like McKnight is meeting this moment. With that, I would like to transition to our federal partners. Amy Kenyon represents the Department of Transportation. She will be speaking first, and then we'll transfer to thank you, Charisse Tyre from, I mixed it up, I'm sorry. Amy Kenyon from the Environmental Protection Agency and Charisse from the Department of Transportation. Sorry about that. Okay, Amy.
We can switch, I can represent transportation. Thank you, Helen. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm grateful to you and Stephanie and Communities First for setting this beautiful table and inviting those of us from federal agencies to come and to show up differently around place and in ways that really center community and community voice and vision. So really appreciate that. As Helen said, I'm Amy Kenyon. I work for the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. I started in February, so I'm pretty new. But I have a fun job today. I get to show up and talk about millions and billions of dollars, but with what our office is working on and the resources that we're putting out through our environmental justice programs. But what I most want to focus on in what I talk about today is more about the how, the process. How is EPA, through its Office of Environmental Justice and our programs, centering community and place in order to advance us towards greater racial, economic, climate, environmental justice. Everything that Sacha said about the history of philanthropy disinvesting in community is even more so true for federal government. And so I want to acknowledge that and talk about some of the down payment, the steps that we're taking to invest funds differently. So what I will first share is you've heard about the Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, or TICTACs, that's the acronym. As Stephanie said in her remarks earlier, federal agencies have heard from community for a really long time, for years and years, about the needs that communities have for the basic supports to help them navigate apply for, compete for, and access, and then deploy federal resources. And so the Tic Tacs are EPA's response to that request. We are in the process of setting up a national hub and spoke network of Tic Tacs, one or more in each region that are that are a network of technical assistance centers that are available and open to community without an application or a competition or a fee to build capacity for just that, applying for, navigating, understanding what's the right federal programs for the needs of a particular community. EPA has never done this before and needed to do this at a national scale at the same time that these unprecedented amount of resources are rolling out from the bill and IRA legislation. So in the process of setting that up. And when EPA put the request for proposals out, really hoped that environmental justice leaders and community would step up and respond to the call to partner with EPA in order to provide that ground-up assistance, but assistance that was really rooted in and reflects the community, as opposed to being capacity building or technical assistance that is, zooming in from somewhere else. And so really happy to say that here in Region 5, Blacks and Green is really emblematic of that, those values and what we're trying to reflect with the Tic Tacs. And I'm really looking forward to getting to hear their presentation about the Tic Tac and the Sustainable Square Mile later. I think that's tomorrow. So the Tic Tacs are sort of the first building block of the resources and the programs that we're putting in place. And EPA, the Environmental Justice Office, use appropriations money so that can be used for a much broader base of support and work than what is in the legislation for the types of climate and environmental focus. So the Tic Tacs can be a bit more flexible than some of the other programs that have bill and IRA funding. So then the next piece that I wanted to talk about is the Thriving Communities Grant Makers. Stephanie also referenced this. This will be $50 million per region, EPA region, we're in Region 5, to set up a grant maker who will re-grant then 40 million of that 50 million in 2 community-based organizations for project assessment planning and project development activities. Again, must go to community-based organizations, not to state government, federal government, unlike some of the formula dollars that I know we'll also be talking about. In amounts of between $150,000 to $300,000. And the purpose of this was understanding that EPA wanted and needed to get thousands of these grants out to community-based organizations, and we just wouldn't be able to do it effectively, quickly, or equitably with the infrastructure that the federal agency had in place. So that's the purpose of the grant makers. One piece I wanted to flag that I think is unique, the request for applications asked the applicants to come with a plan for participatory or collaborative governance. So how would community-based organizations not only be the recipient of those dollars, but be at the table in designing and implementing that re-granting program? I think I hope maybe somebody can tell me otherwise, but I think that might be the first time that the words participatory governance were in a federal request for applications. So Helen would know. And then the third piece I wanted to talk about briefly is we're working to put out, what you'll next see from our office is the Community Change Grant Program Notice of Funding Opportunities. That is a $2 billion program for place-based grants to address climate and environmental pollution issues in historically underserved communities. These will be place-based grants of about $10 to $20 million. The applicants, again, must be community-based organizations or a local government or a tribal government or a university in partnership with a community-based organization. And again, looking for that collaborative governance. So how is community centered in the project priorities and in the process of deploying those funds? The last thing I wanted to talk about, again, building on Stephanie's remarks, is the Thriving Communities Network. So EPA office working to put those programs in place, and also recognizing that this isn't something that we can do by ourselves, and wanted to not make this just a 2 to 4 year program of doing things differently, but how do we change how we do business as federal agencies, and how do we show up together and coordinate around place-based investments. So the Thriving Communities Network, which we'll talk more about over the coming days, is an interagency network that is dedicated to the coordination of federal agencies around place-based capacity building with historically underserved and marginalized communities. The network was initiated by EPA, Department of Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, and the Department of Energy, and it's grown. We now have 8 agencies, many of whom are here today and will be sharing their programs with you over the next couple of days. And so it's actually, Sharice and I get to work together and build out this network and sort of support its development and its growth. So it's nice to sort of be out in community and get to talk about it. It's kind of I tend to think like nobody wants to talk about an interagency network, but I think that's what we're going to do these next couple days. And I just to acknowledge the last thing I'll say, why I believe that this interagency coordination and collaboration is important is because we know that people don't live single issue lives. People don't work or live or come together in a sector or in a modality. You know, we come together in place and in community. So again, just really appreciate the invitation and the agitation from Communities First and community groups for federal agencies, for me and my colleagues to show up differently in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Cherie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sharice Tyre. I serve as a senior program analyst at the Department of Transportation within the Office of the Secretary. I am so happy to be here. This is my first time in Detroit. So I heard the Midwest, Stephanie giving shout outs, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna connect with some people over here. But on behalf of the Department of Transportation, thank you so much, Helen and Stephanie and everyone with Communities First Fund for organizing this event and bringing us together regionally. I think based on your question, Helen, from a DOT standpoint, as we look at rural communities, urban, and suburban communities, we have the bipartisan, the Biden-Harris administration's agenda to just ensure that communities are focused and expanding, that they're expanding economic opportunities from the bottom up to the middle out. And as I think about that, that is not going to work unless we start to build out strong partnerships, strong community partnerships with one another to ensure that those communities are actually advancing the needs of the communities and based on exactly what it is that they need. So at this very moment, I just want to say that I'm so happy to be here to connect with you all. We are meeting the moment to advance this administration's priorities, but it's also a time for us to connect to figure out how we are going to change up to do business in the long run from decades from now, because we know that there are communities who have actually never had a seat at the table to make decisions for their communities, and these are strong economic infrastructure decisions that are being made, and they're left out. Communities, they are being divided by freeways, where they have no access to get to their jobs or even other resources. We have high transportation and housing costs because there are communities that were not considered to have that mobility in mind when those housing infrastructure projects were developed. And then we also have communities that are point blank, they're experiencing poor health outcomes because of greenhouse gas emissions, climate, just terrible things that have happened over decades of time because systemic disinvestments just really weren't focused on these communities. And so just bringing it back from a DOT standpoint, I think what that means for the Department of Transportation is that we have this moment right now to really focus on equity. Actually, all the federal partners have this moment right now to really stand up equity as a major priority. And so programs such as the Thriving Communities Program, which I represent. This is a $22 million technical assistance program where we're providing capacity builders to provide intensive technical assistance to 64 communities. Just this past spring, we were able to award 4 capacity builders in 64 communities who wrote us a letter of interest stating that they need support to help with climate, help with housing, transit-oriented development projects, just to be able to get some intensive access to them, intensive technical assistance to them, to be able to access funds, to be able to deploy projects that they see for their communities. Here is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity now through technical assistance that they can do that. And we're so excited, as Amy stated, Stephanie mentioned the Thriving Communities Network. Here we are working together as a coordinated effort. Yeah, it's an interagency effort. We've heard of them before, but I'm telling you now, these 8 agencies that we have, especially under the guidance of the White House, we are so excited. We are determined to ensure that our federal place-based coordinated technical assistance programs are actually reaching these communities that need the help, and we're focusing on just so many different cross-cutting topics. So I just want to just recognize that there are billions of dollars out here, but we need to really hone in on these communities to ensure that they are able to address these needs. It's one thing to say, hey, we have $1 billion out here, but it's another thing to really provide some assistance to communities to say, do you have the capacity to write a grant application? What's this project that you guys been working on? We know that, you know, it's been in the works for a while. What is it that you need to do this? So we're encouraging you all, especially just kind of shouting out our my DOT regional colleagues who are here, and the other regional federal partners who are here. We want to make those connection points to say, if we're working on something that's related to housing, we have someone that may be one of our DOT 64 communities, guess what? I have a point of contact that's right out at the Department of Housing, and they're able to connect you to some resources that'll help you. Same thing with EPA, the same thing with our partners at USDA. We're here to provide a coordinated supporting effort to you all. So just recognizing that we have this money, but as Sacha said, we need philanthropy as well. You know, there's so much work that you guys can do to help support now that we have this once-in-a-lifetime funding out, but we need your support in helping communities really tie in the dots and make those connections to say, we can support you with writing a grant application, or we can do some outreach. You know, we can do some community engagement and help you guys get a seat at the table. This is what it's about. This is how we're bringing those pieces together. So we want to see all of this stuff come together, so then that way, once this administration is over with, but if that does come, we want to say that from decades now that we've created a system where it's sustainable. We have communities who have some longevity, that are able to know, this is how I'm going to access some DOT funds from 10 years from now. This is who I can connect with at the Department of Housing to help this community. So I know that there was a call for action by my leader, Christopher Coes, and just making that call again. Let's come together, just not as a national standpoint, but regionally, so that we can help communities connect and thrive. Thank you.
I'm going to quote my daughter. I want to thank you baddies. Y'all all slayed, so I'm just going to hold that right there. That was awesome. And I want to ground us because we had a lot of information. And if nothing else, I want you to walk away with these points as we move through the next 2 days. The key takeaways for me have been, we are ready for this moment. This is what we've been fighting for and what we've been asking for communities to be at the center. The federal government, philanthropy, and others in positional power have heard that. What that then has translated into, we have oriented ourselves in a different way. And how does that look? You're hearing that the federal government is actually thinking about how it supports community infrastructure, our civic infrastructure directly. One of the things that we've seen is historic disinvestment, and I'll just use Detroit as the example. Like, we have systematically not invested in this region since the 50s, right? It's been intentional. But what you see that is different now is that the feds are actually saying, we know that you have been basically erased from the dialogue, but we are now gonna put resources on the ground that you can apply for directly. You're gonna bypass the state if you want. You could bypass your local government. Detroit, a place that has been in receivership, we're not even gonna talk to anybody else. You, me and you, we can directly apply for these resources in a way that has never happened, at the scale that has never happened. But in addition to that, they are thinking about what systems need to be put in place. So this is not episodic. They are putting in place principles that then govern their dollars moving forward for the breadth of these resources, which is gonna be between the expenditures over the next 4 to 6 years. That is significant to the fact that we can start building out the civic infrastructure in an Illinois, in a Minnesota. That is ground changing. I just want y'all to sit in that. And then the other thing is, one of the things that Amy talked about is that there's also an intentionality to democratize the process, okay? So historically, somebody in some column tower in Washington, D.C. decided how the money was gonna go out. This is actually a democratized process, how many of the discretionary dollars are going out. While we cannot change formula, what we can do is change the discretionary grants and how they land on the ground. So they're trying to democratize that process. But why that's important, going back to what Sacha said, the majority of this money is going to go to the state. The state hoops surround around like well, this community doesn't have a plan, or this community isn't set up to absorb resources. The interesting thing is the discretionary money is priming and getting communities ready for that, so that's not the barrier. So when the state says, oh, we can't actually adopt a plan that a community has done, they're setting up the conditions that that plan actually has standing, and you have the weight and the ability to integrate that into local planning processes. That's the proposition here. And then the last thing that I would say is the relationships. We are in space together, and if for us, like we joked, Stephanie and I joked, like, what does success look like? Success for us looks like, at the end of this, we are in a deeper relationship with one another, in a space where we are co-creating and we are holding each other accountable around these dollars. And one of the things that you've heard, even within the administration, there's an interagency body that is collectively thinking about how they stack their resources and what is unique, and we've never seen this before. Even during Obama, when we did the Sustainable Communities Partnership, it was 3 agencies that were working together, but we still focused on our issue areas. Like Department of Transportation worked on complete streets. You had the HUD was doing the promise zones. Like everybody still was in their lane. Folks are really being intentional around that. They understand that they have to partner and show up for community and see community as place. Not as a water issue, not as a sustainability issue, but as a place. This is a game changer. This has never happened. So what my offering is with this group is, how do we actually leverage the fact that the federal government is reimagining how they show up and how we can hold them accountable to show up and center community? This is what this opportunity is over the next 2 days. So with that, I would like to say this is our moment, and over the next 2 days, I'm excited about us rolling up our sleeves and having a collective conversation around how we hold the feds accountable, but also put forward our vision for just and sustainable communities. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Stephanie. Thanks.
I just want to run through these numbers real quick just so that we are clear about why we're in this room. EPA is getting ready to put out over $500 million in each region. That's why we're sitting in this regional convening. $50 million, with $40 million being re-granted through a participatory grant process that is asking for community-based organizations to help to inform the strategy around the $40 million as part of how to meet this moment. And we'll find that out in the next couple of weeks. On top of that, they have a $2 billion community change grant that will be awarded to community-based organizations in the range of $10 to $20 million to advance our community plans. Okay, so that is why we created the sense of urgency to say, what do we need to organize in meeting this moment? There was a lot of conversation here about the federal government and the role that it's playing. And we are going to shift to leadership breakouts that really offer the space for just community-based organizations to really think about this conversation and what is the infrastructure that will need to be in place. We will also have state and local breakout discussions down the hallway in Lafayette. And we'll also have a federal coordination breakout discussion, because we know that for many of the federal agencies in the room, it's the first time that many of you all are sitting in space. Particularly for USDA and at the Department of Transportation, the Federal Highways Administration, there's actually a staffer in every state, in addition to HUD. They have field director offices that are meant to be available to you, but oftentimes we don't even know that they're there. Separately, there is an entire regional strategy that brings together both HUD, DOT, and EPA, and they share the same regions. But we often don't share the same space, especially post-COVID. So there will be a separate leadership conversation just for the federal family. But before we transition to that conversation, I want to unpack something that Sacha uplifted, which is that the majority of this money is going to be flowing through formula funding. And I'll describe a little bit more of that after we come back from our organizing session. But the states ultimately will, for every dollar that's put out, when we talk about billions and trillions, the states get 90% of that money. It's a great thing if you have a governor that has committed to making sure that every single dollar per capita actually gets spent in that state. But it also requires a level of coordination. And one of the things that President Biden did on the day that he signed the infrastructure bill, more specifically the bipartisan infrastructure law, was to appoint an infrastructure coordinator and request that every governor have an infrastructure coordinator that could help to really think about how we unlock this money across issue areas, transportation, water. And every state technically has an infrastructure coordinator. Do you know who your infrastructure coordinator is? Have you ever heard of an infrastructure coordinator? Well, this is the purpose of us coming together, because it's also an opportunity for us to organize. What I will say is that in the state of Michigan, there has been a very intentional effort to make sure that there is greater coordination happening across the agencies. Something that we learned from COVID is that many of the lessons from that experience brought together interagency teams to respond to that crisis. And as they fast forward to this moment of the federal funding flowing, one of the opportunities is to really think about how that coordination continues on. I want to be able to offer the space for a leadership spotlight for the state of Michigan more specifically. And before we go to breakouts, I just wanted to offer a context for how some states are doing this work, and specifically how Michigan is thinking about this work. I want to just ask that Regina Strong, who is the environmental justice advocate for the state of Michigan, and Corey Connolly, who is the climate energy advisor for the state, if they could come up and just offer some context, but also just give remarks on behalf of the governor and of course just welcoming us to the state, because ultimately we know that this has to be an organizing strategy that also includes the state, because they are the grantees for the majority of this money, and they are critical partners for us to really think about how we organize to meet this moment. And then I'll come back up to get us into our organizing breakouts. With that, Regina and Corey, thank you.
Hey everyone, Regina and I like to kind of tag team these events, takes the pressure off. But good to see everybody here. I think first and foremost, just want to say thanks for the conveners of this space, for everybody for showing up. We're really grateful to see this happening in Michigan in particular, and grateful to be invited to this space. Regina and I got the invite sometime last week, and we scrambled to clear our schedules because we wanted to make sure we were here. A couple of things that I want to highlight. My office, so Corey Connolly, Office of Climate and Energy, our office is focused on implementing the governor's My Healthy Climate Plan. As a part of that, it's to get to 50 to 52% emissions reductions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. Part of that commitment was to both reaffirm commitments to the Justice 40 initiative federally, and also double down on that around state funding. So making that same commitment, around 40% of funds from state funds around climate and energy going to disadvantaged communities, to benefit disadvantaged communities. So we're excited about this. I'll give shine a little bit of light real quick on some of the ways in which we're approaching this work. Coming out of the climate plan, we identified a couple of major priorities. One was for us to implement at the pace and scale we needed to implement. We needed as much federal funding to come to Michigan on climate and energy as possible. Second, in order to do so, both in order to do so just generally and in order to do so in a just and equitable manner, we needed to build capacity for community-based organizations and communities that have typically been left out of the conversation to be more engaged. So we held a couple of listening sessions. We heard that. We've been working on things. State government takes longer than you might want it to sometimes, but we did hear that. In terms of how we're approaching federal funding, somebody asked who the Michigan Infrastructure Coordinator is. That's Zach Kolodin, the Chief Infrastructure Officer for the state of Michigan. If anybody wants to make sure they get in touch or talk to him, let us know. We talk to him on a regular basis. As a part of that, I saw a number of our advisory council members here from our Climate Council and Environmental Justice Council. As a part of that, my office actually coordinates the climate and energy vertical on federal funding. So that looks like us making sure we're getting eyes on and going after every single formula dollar we can get, every competitive opportunity that the state can apply for. And then the last bucket is, how do we make sure that non-state entities are going after all of the buckets of money that are available? It's one of our biggest opportunities on climate. It's the biggest opportunity on justice. And so I'm really glad that we got to the part where the state's getting a bunch of money, because these investments in civic infrastructure that you all are talking about, that the Community Change Grant Program can support, the Thriving Communities Program can support, we really hope and are counting on being able to support those efforts and also leverage those efforts so that when we do have these formula funds, we have partners that are ready to partner with us on these programs. And so just to give you an example, our department is managing $200+ million in home energy rebates across the state. We've applied for, and knock on wood, we will receive, hopefully up to $250 million for the Solar for All program in Michigan. To get those programs out the door and to get them to the communities that need it the most, and to make sure we meet and exceed our Justice 40 commitments, we do need all the partnerships of the folks in the room here in Michigan, and with philanthropy as well. And we've already started having some of those conversations about how we can partner and leverage state resources to bring more in. I'll end with just a couple of things, kind of cliffhangers a little bit, but some of the things we're trying to do on technical assistance. Our Technical Assistance Center through the Infrastructure Office is just getting stood up. I believe the director is here. Raise your hand, Chris. So if she's got her hand up back there, but if you're looking for more information about technical assistance from the state of Michigan, that's your person. Our office is launching a climate core, a capacity building climate core program that will be opening host institution applications for in the coming weeks. And like many of these resources, you can't have a climate core member write a grant for you, but they can absolutely help make sure you're on top of it and help think through how to take advantage of all the programs that are coming. And then we have some other things that we're hopeful to see coming through, coming up that hopefully will be exciting announcements to bring some additional resources to go alongside the philanthropic resources and the federal resources. And again, grateful to have the opportunity to chat with you all today about this and looking forward to more. And I'll hand it to Regina to take it from here.
Thanks, Corey. First, I know there are a few state people in the room, so can we just acknowledge who's in? We talked about Kristen, who's here from the Office of Infrastructure. Any other state folks in the room? I see you, Kate, from the Office of Environmental Justice, Public Advocate. Good afternoon. I'm so happy to see so many of my friends and familiar faces in this room. To me, this is an exciting convening. Like Corey said, we're just, getting into the flow of this, but to be able to talk about money that can actually go directly to communities is really exciting. So much of the funding that has come from the federal government, and I love my federal partners, but it requires certain level of partnerships for it to get actually to communities. And so convenings like this help us build that opportunity. My office, the Office of Environmental Justice, we don't have B's and T's, but we are getting $20 million that the legislature appropriated for us to do some grants that can hopefully help build on and support some of the funding that's coming from the federal government. In addition to that, the priority as money comes through the Office of Climate and Energy, and Corey organizes, and does all the convening and all the things that are going on. We're working to make sure not just that my office is at the table, but also community partners are at the table to ensure those who had the most impact from our previous energy generation get the opportunity to benefit as we move forward. And I want to have conversations about what benefit means. Is benefit just something happening in the community, or there's a lot of economic growth that will happen because of this new transition? And from the standpoint of environmental justice, I think it's really, really important that we let communities speak for themselves. We hear them and we invest. And we let folks build their own economic opportunities by ensuring they have the information they need. So these are really important conversations today and tomorrow, and that will continue. I also want to acknowledge a couple members of the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, which is the state's first environmental justice conference council that works with my office, as well as the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team. I think someone up here earlier said nobody's excited about an interagency team, but it really is exciting to have all of the state agencies and all of the federal agencies joining to talk about environmental justice. Think about that. That is light years ahead of where we were just a decade ago, just 5 years ago. And so I see this as an amazing opportunity for us all. And I want to welcome you again to Michigan and to Detroit, where this conversation should be centered, because I know my Detroit advocates will agree that we have the strongest advocate corps. They hold our feet to the fire every single day. We get phone calls. We let folks call us. I would say how many people in here have my personal phone number, but I won't say that, but I'm glad that people use it, because I'm very, very committed to ensuring that we hear from communities. So have a great rest of this convening. Welcome to Michigan. Enjoy both the opportunity here and tomorrow. I think you're going to the Wright Museum. Please take the opportunity to check that out as well. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I want to reground, because not every state, first of all, has an infrastructure czar that is accessible. because there are some best practices that are happening even right now, and I just want to ground it because I know for those who are in Michigan, it may not feel that way, and it may not be the lived experience or reality. But compared to others in the reason why we chose to come to Michigan was having a governor who has committed to really thinking about how every federal dollar is coming back, particularly on the discretionary side, per capita to the state. Being able to have an interagency team is actually not happening across the region. I'm just uplifting that because as we think about how we organize to meet this moment, there will be questions on how do we continue the conversation and what may be needed in your own state. And there are some pieces that are happening. Many folks do not actually have an environmental justice advisory committee that is helping to inform the strategy. That could be another strategy to really think about how we meet this moment. Another key piece is many states have not necessarily put in a technical assistance center to help to unlock even the discretionary money that is coming through the federal government. And many states have not put even $1 million towards funding environmental justice groups. And so there are some key pieces here that are coming out even in highlighting Michigan that really was the reason why we said we had to do it here and having this conversation. I also just want to acknowledge the fact that we are behind time, but we want to make sure that there is space for community voice before we go into the breakout. We have talked at you for the last almost 2 hours, and then we are going to go into breakouts, but I did want to just make sure that if there were questions that folks had or anything that folks felt like were critical to be uplifted, that we have the collective space to just hear. And then we will kind of take that into the rooms that we will go into as part of the breakout. So I see 2 hands right now. I just wanted to make sure that, 3? Okay. 4? Okay, and then we'll take those 4, and then we'll come back. It's not the end, right? This is the beginning of the conversation. And again, you know, I want to just be clear. No one is coming to save us. No one is coming to save us. This is us. We are what we have. This is the group of doers who are committed to making sure that we figure it out together collectively. I have no answers more than you have the answers. We are centering the wisdom of community because ultimately, with resources, without resources, we have been organizing for decades, and this is our moment. This is our moment. I also just want to ground one more piece, which is that as we think about what we need to do, it is the collective we. Going back to the land acknowledgement that grounded us, right? Everyone in this room has a role to play, and we're really hoping that you tap into it as we think about how we organize and strategize collectively together. These are the folks who have committed. Everyone in this room, you were literally tapped. You were invited into this room because folks saw you as the leaders who are doing this work intentionally every single day and leading on the values that will be necessary to meet this moment. So this is our room. This is our organizing team. Let's make sure we build together.
Thank you.